Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So if you watched the big Meghan Markle thing last night, the one thing that came out of it for me is, as she said, look, when I was a member of a union, they protected me. I had protection from my union, and that's the message for me that comes out of that whole thing that everyone should take from it. And because here's the thing. Workers need some protection. They need someone who's going to stand up for them. I have a friend who's the head of Good Jobs First, Greg Leroy. He loves to say that the economic crimes against workers much worse than your local stick-ups. And he points out the fact that all of the bank robberies, all the gas station holdups, the convenience stores, all of the robberies that the FBI Uniform Crime Report points out, worth about $500 million. The economic crimes against workers, wage theft, misclassification, theft of benefits, that kind of stuff, 100 times worse. Something like $50 billion each and every year. So when I see a story of someone going after those criminals and holding them accountable, we got to get them on the program, which is why I've asked Larry Krasner to come talk with us. He's the Philadelphia District Attorney. They have come out with a great new program, this Worker Protection Unit. In fact, they've just had their first conviction. And here to share some thoughts on this historic moment, I've asked Larry to come talk with us. Larry, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Rick. Thank you for having me.
So I look at this number from my good friend Greg Leroy that, the economic crimes against workers are 100 times worse than what you see on the evening news of someone sticking up a gas station or a bank. Yet we don't really ever hear about it.
Well, there's a reason for that, and it's not a good reason, but there is a reason, which is that, first of all, a lot of people who become chief prosecutors are very politically ambitious, and so they're not just thinking about holding that office and enforcing the law. They're thinking about, how do I become a governor? How do I become a senator? And so they often get to be friendly with people who can donate a lot of money. It is difficult to get your campaign money together off of working people. It is easier to get your campaign money together off of donors who can donate the maximum amount. So unfortunately, that personal political ambition tends to hold hands with rich people. And rich people are either themselves bosses or they have bosses beneath them. And so we often see what has happened historically in Philly, which is that if there's criminal activity going on and it is being perpetrated by a boss, they're liable never to be accountable. But if there's less serious criminal activity going on by working people or poor people, they're going to be accountable. At the most basic level, if you walk into a local convenience store and you steal a couple bags of chips, then they catch you, the cops are going to come, they're going to arrest you, you're going to be charged with retail theft. But if you are an employer, and I'm referring now to the case that we're prosecuting in Philly, if you're an employer who walks off with $110,000 that belongs to your employees, and then you say, oh, sorry, we went bankrupt, I ran out of money, you often do it with the expectation there's no criminal consequence. That is a, quote, civil matter, unquote. Well, no, it isn't. If stealing 2 bags of chips is a crime, then stealing $110,000 from a bunch of your workers that was supposed to go back to their union, that was for your benefits, that's a crime too.
No, absolutely.
And so, we were very proud this year to found a unit that is specifically for the purpose of prosecuting crimes committed against workers, all workers. In this case, these are union workers. We put in charge of it a woman who had been not only studying labor in college and so on, but she had been a labor attorney for many years. And we turned her into a prosecutor, thank goodness. Super talented person. She knew the right people. She understood the issues, things like misclassification of wages, human trafficking, this kind of stuff where you're just flat out stealing from your employees. And we brought a 37-count indictment with felony charges that totaled up to, for stealing basically, that totaled up to $110,000 of theft. And, it's not enough to say I went bankrupt, so sorry, I stole from all my workers. I took their time, I took their benefits. It's just not enough.
Right.
It's something we would love to see a lot of other prosecutors do around the country.
No, I'm right there with you. But, you look at the fact that, as you pointed out, this contractor basically shorted the Plumbers Local 690 in Philadelphia of $110,000 in benefit payments, and then just went, oops, never mind. And look, the union, I'm sure, was dogged in pursuing this. And look, I'm sure, had a lot to bend your ear about as well. I often worry about those workers who work for companies like this, who don't have a union, who just, there's nobody fighting for them.
Well, I do too, and there are some things that exist in the civil context, which are positive. There are certain laws that provide for triple damages when you steal people's vacation time or you steal their wages. And that is the appropriate tool in some cases. I know an attorney who actually does pretty well. That's his entire practice, is getting employers who steal your vacation time or who steal your pay, things of that sort. But it's just not enough in certain circumstances. There has to be a bigger hammer in certain circumstances. Otherwise, when you have an entity or a person motivated by profit, even if it's treble damages or you get 3 times the damages when you get caught, well, if you can get away with it most of the time, it still may be the right economic decision.
Yep.
It's just not okay to rip people off for their work, especially in a country where the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class has been squeezed forever. It's just not okay. And you're right. It's easier when unions are involved because they see the problem coming. They gather the information. They can bring a package to a prosecutor and say, look at what they're doing to our people. But, we are every bit as excited about protecting any worker, unionized or not. And we certainly hope that they will come forward in our jurisdiction. I hope they'll come forward in all jurisdictions. I hope they'll come forward in campaigns and say the prosecutor I want, the chief prosecutor I want, is somebody who is going to look out for workers, because that is not the history of what's happened with American prosecution.
No, and it's something that we absolutely have to do. And if folks want to get in touch with your office, there is a phone number, 215-686-9902. We'll get that out on social media so people can take a look at it, or email at fraudcomplaint@phila.gov. That's phila.gov. We'll get that out as well. But here's the thing. You look at the numbers that are out there, and as my friend Greg Leroy likes to point out, the fact that wage theft is so rampant, and this economic theft is so rampant, much worse than the guy sticking up the gas station or the bank. And it's taken this long for someone like you to go, we should be putting these people in jail. I think speaks a lot about the past and what people have gotten away with and why it's so bad.
Well, I don't want to pretend we're the first and only ones to do this, because we're not. There have been some pretty forward-thinking prosecutors around, including, for example, Morganelli in, I think it's Northampton Township, Northampton County,
right,
Pennsylvania. And there have been a few others around the country, but this is really the way it should be. You're supposed to be even-handed. You're supposed to treat famous people and unfamous people the same way, broken rich the same way. And this is really how it should be. We shouldn't be so excited about locking up homeless people for stealing food and have no excitement about locking up people driving, Range Rovers who are using bankruptcy law to get out of the fact that they ripped off a whole bunch of people. Let me put this plug in, though, for people who may contact our office. The attorney who is in charge of the unit in our office is a woman named Danielle Newsome, Newsome, I think. Well, maybe I'm messing it up. Danielle with an E. But she's great. And, before she really got rolling, she made some calls around the country to study some best practices around the country. If there is a prosecutor's office that wants to get at this, or maybe a candidate who's running for a chief prosecutor with an agenda that speaks to reform, who wants to hear about it, we'd be more than happy to pass along some of the things that she's learned, not only in her career as a labor attorney, but in her studies of best practices in other offices, because this really is how it should be across the country.
No, I absolutely agree. And it's one of these moments where you go, there need to be real penalties for these crimes, and not just, as you pointed out, a slap on the wrist, triple the penalties, but still, you get away with it often enough. That's just a slap on the wrist. And I take this as well to the point to where I think we should be holding employers accountable for unsafe work acts as well. You look at the story that just came out today, 1,000 deaths from COVID that went uninvestigated and nobody knows anything about. And this is one of those things that infuriates me, is that so much of what happens in this country to workers just gets swept under the rug or forgotten about. and I would like to see those 1,000 deaths avenged at some point.
I hear that. It's there have been some famous examples of what I consider to be criminal acts perpetrated by employers. For example, having employees moving 55-gallon drums full of toxic materials with no protection after you've painted over the skull and crossbones that are on the can, having outrageously unsafe work conditions that violate OSHA and on a construction site, so that you have a group of people who are killed when scaffolding falls. This is a little bit like talking about traffic accidents. There are some traffic accidents that are mistakes. Even if people die, they're not criminal acts.
Right.
But there are also some traffic accidents where the speed limit is 35 and you decided to go 100. And that's a crime. It's a whole different thing. So we should not assume that a loss of life of an employee on a work site. I mean, we had a famous case in Philly where there was a terrible result. It's called the Salvation Army case, but a number of people were crushed when a building caved in. It had a lot to do with improper demolition going on next door. And needless to say, the only guy who got charged criminally, this is a prior administration, is the crane operator, right? Never mind, the architect. Never mind the people who filled out all the paperwork and were well aware of the shortcuts that were being taken by this crane operator. This is a typical scenario where there's plenty of blame to go around, but it's all going to fall on the one who is on the front line, and none of it's going to fall on the people who designed the situation, chose to cut corners to save money by doing things a certain way, and cause deaths. We have to be willing to hold people responsible for what they do. And not just the broke ones, and not just the ones who don't have power to fight back, but everybody in an even-handed way.
No, I'm right there with you, and I'm looking at this moment. Joe Biden came out the other day with a statement on, the National Labor Relations Act is to encourage people to join and form unions. The president supports that. I'm hoping that there's this new move towards protecting workers, towards holding employers accountable, because for the last 40 plus years, at least in my working lifespan, it's all been attack, and workers absorbing. I'm hoping at some point that there's someone who's going to level that playing field and hold others accountable, so that we're not left holding the bag all the time.
I'm with you 100%. I think to the extent that the people's voice is heard, and I don't just mean unions, but I mean unions and also other people who are just working people. And they say, here's the news, we're voting, but we're voting for prosecutors and police who are going to treat us as well as they treat the people who employ us and the people who invest in the companies that our employers work for. When you get to that point, democracy really starts to work. It hasn't been working as well for us for quite some time as it might. I'm certainly happy with the last presidential campaign, the last presidential outcome for sure. But it just hasn't been working as well. And I think part of the problem we have is that people don't always realize how much power they have. When Stacey Abrams was able to achieve that incredible result in Georgia by really turning out tons of votes with efforts that went back years in building that groundwork, she set a standard, and the standard is labor can not only do well, it can have a tremendous comeback in terms of union organizing and so on, but you're going to have to register a lot of votes, and you're going to have to take back some of these gerrymandered seats for us to get there.
No, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, but for me, it's about grabbing the reins and empowering working people to step forward and not no longer be the ones absorbing all of these hits. And I'm hoping what you're doing catches on. I'm hoping district attorneys across the state and across the country take on to this and say that we're not going to let this continue to happen in our districts, because sadly, it happens all across this country. There are cases everywhere. And to have someone who's looking out for working people like you, I say good on you.
Well, I appreciate that. I think you're kind of looking out for working people too. So there we go. But nobody more than Danielle Newsom, and anybody who really wants, the key to unlock this, get with Danielle, and I'm sure that she will be more than happy to share whatever we can share.
And we'll make sure we get links out on social media, and so people can take a look at that. Last question I've got for you, as district attorney, I had a bunch of people go, "You're going to interview Larry Krasner?" I go, "Yeah." Is he going to do anything to Trump? I had to throw a Trump question there for some listeners. Do you see anything happening with Donald Trump?
Well, let me just say that if Donald Trump wants to commit a crime in Philadelphia, then there will be a consequence for him, just like there would for anyone else.
There you go.
Do I see something coming for Donald Trump? Yes. I think that there's a very significant possibility he's going to face consequences in state court. I'm not so sure he'll ever face them in federal court, since the man has basically been a liar, a cheat, and a thief his whole life. He has a few problems, and it's not just with taxes. So I think he is going to face consequences somewhere. I think the jury that he faces may not look 100% like his voters, and that's a good thing. It's time for him to be accountable like anybody else.
There you go. Larry, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure.
Good stuff. Larry Krasner, district attorney there in Philadelphia. If you want to check out what they're doing, we'll get links out on social media. If you've got a situation, fraudcomplaint@phila.gov. That's how you get to that. Or contact Danielle Newsom. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2007. That was the day 7,000 workers at Northrop Grumman, a shipyard company in Pascagoula, Mississippi, went out on strike. Grumman is one of the largest defense contractors in the world. The workers were members of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 733, and the Pascagoula Metal Trades Council. They were still reeling from the ravages of Hurricane Katrina just 2 years earlier. The hurricane had devastated the Mississippi Gulf Coast and sent prices for housing skyrocketing. But while workers suffered, Katrina brought $3 billion in federal contracts to Northrop Grumman to repair hurricane damage. Despite this, Grumman proposed a 4-year contract for the workers with no raises and increased health care costs. For many workers, this did not sit well. They knew the company had received massive government contracts, but still was not willing to treat workers fairly at the bargaining table. The union members rejected the offer and voted to strike. The company came back with a proposal offering small raises, which did not keep pace with the cost of living. The strike was called. For 4 weeks, workers marched and manned the picket lines. During the strike, the company cut off the workers' health care coverage. The company then offered slightly higher wages and reduced the increases to health care coverage. Although the proposal was not enough to keep up with the soaring local cost of living, union members voted to end the strike and accept the offer.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God is going to trouble these waters.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Wade in the water.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I'll tell you, we need more people who are going to go after employers who do bad things, hold them accountable, and as I've been saying for years, lock them up. Look, finding them is one thing. Putting them in a pinstripe suit behind the bars of the Gray Bar Hotel, that's the way you stop a lot of things. That's the way you get them to think twice, because a couple of bucks, they'll write that off. But sitting behind bars, getting the tin cup, singing "Nobody Knows," that's what we need to be doing. I got an email from George, who's very angry. George, very angry. Rick, you shouldn't be so happy about Biden's COVID relief bill. It passed with fewer people eligible for checks. It has less help for the unemployed, and there's no $15 an hour minimum wage. He says the richest people in the country got richer during the pandemic, while Congress slashed help for the rest of us. Major fail, he says. This is one of those moments where you go, politics is the art of the possible. This was the deal they could get. Would I have liked to have seen a $15 an hour minimum wage in there? Yes. Would I have liked to see residual checks to go on for a couple of months? Yes. Would I like to see a lot of things in that? Absolutely. Wasn't going to happen. And I'm sorry about that. That's just the reality. You can be mad at me for pointing out what is the reality, or you can take it as what it is. You had a number of centrist Democrats who, they didn't want to spend it. Joe Manchin being, the big one, the one who did the dipsy-do with the thumbs down on the minimum wage. She's another one. You got the two from New Hampshire. They just weren't coming along. Would I have liked to have seen a much more robust plan? Yeah, absolutely. But you got the best deal, and here's the reality. You got the best deal you were going to get. And here's the reality. This is a win. Learn to take a win. This is one of those moments where you go, yep, wasn't everything we wanted. Learn to take the win. We got a lot of things. And it wasn't the $2,000 that it wasn't that we were promised. It was $1,400 plus the $600 that Trump gave us, even though that's $2,000. I think everyone knows that in simple math. Still, it was more than I thought we were going to get, to be quite honest. So take the win. Take the win. I got this really funny email today from my uncle. My uncle is a very well-to-do guy. Crazy a little bit, huge Trump supporter. He sent me this, this really nice kind of chain email. Yeah, he's on that level of sophistication at this moment. It's the still doing the chain email stuff because he doesn't do Twitter or Facebook or any of that stuff. It's email is right there. He's 80 some years old. So he sends me this thing about how things were in 1955, how wonderful life was in 1955. About I never imagined that stamps should be 7 cents to mail a letter. Nobody can hire anybody if they raise the minimum wage to $1. He said, gas was $0.25 a gallon. Who could possibly drive their car with gas going up to $0.25 a gallon? Just a whole bunch of, this old school, when I was a kid, you could go to the movies for a nickel. That kind of stuff. So I went through and I went, and I looked at this stuff and I said, the reality is you go back to that era. And while you were paying a nickel for something, it was almost comparable to the prices that we're paying now. We're just using more dollars. Like that $1 an hour minimum wage in 1955 would have been $9.80 today, where it's only $7.25 now. The gas prices that he was worried about, at $0.25, we're right in line with where they are right now. To mail a letter for 7 cents back then, would have been 69 cents in today's dollars. So, I went through this and I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm going, the idea that, and we tell ourselves that, life was so much better back in the old days. And I would argue to him that, the reason things were better is because people had more money. The working class of this country could get by on a single income and do it fairly well. And that came to the fact because you had very strong labor unions and you had a really high tax rate. One of the things in this spiel that he has is, can you imagine the government taking half of your income in taxes? And this is the one that kind of sent me off. And the reason that I brought this up, because, I had to write back to him and I said, look, you lived through this era where the top marginal tax rate in 1955 was 92%. Now, I understand you're in the 37% tax rate now because you're at the top. You're one of the 1%. I get that. And I know back in 1955, you were not. But had you been back in 1955, you would have paid 92% tax on that dollar over, I think in today's dollars, it'd be like $1.6 million. And the reason that we were able to have all of the stamps were cheaper and all this stuff was cheaper is because the government was heavily subsidizing this stuff. They were building roads. They were investing in education. You could literally go to a college, and a good college, for what is, not a horrible price. So for a moment I said, well, let me go back and look at what tuition costs would be in 1955. And I looked up an Ivy League school like Penn. University of Pennsylvania, in 1955, their stated tuition, fees, room and board were $1,820 a year. That's the equivalent of just about 18 grand a year now. If I could send my kids to Penn for 18 grand a year, if you could send, anyone could send their kids, there'd be nobody allowed. There'd be no room. They'd have to build 2 Penns. Because right now in 2021, the tuition, room and board to go to Penn now is over $60,000. And why is that? Well, it's simple. We heavily subsidized. We gave heavy subsidies to these universities. And we forget about that. Because remember, back in the old days, 1955, where my uncle directed me, the corporate tax rate was 52%. It's 21% now. That top marginal rate, 92%, 37% now. We've taken what built the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization, and we've taken all of the resources out of it, and now we're living on debt and poverty wages. And the wealth class of this country is thrilled to do it. They're thrilled to have you take out credit cards so that you can pay 29% interest on a bag of Cheetos. It is insane. And for me, we can do nothing unless we deal with our tax code. We can do nothing unless we move on taxing the people who did really well during this pandemic. So to my uncle, I hope he reads that, and I hope it sinks into that Trump skull. I'm not going to say he's a numbskull, but he's a Trump skull. So there you go. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Bob Ney is going to be here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day. Stick around.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.